Good evening, welcome to the program. Well, the Prime Minister has been largely out of the media spotlight this week, but there has been plenty going on for the new government. The Climate Commission was scrapped, Operation Sovereign Borders launched, an overhaul of the NBN commenced, and new advisory councils for Indigenous Affairs and Business also launched by the government. All of these things promised by Tony Abbott prior to the election. The real test, though, is about to come. On Monday, he'll be in Jakarta, meeting with the Indonesian President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, talking about, amongst other things, border protection and his plan to turn back the boats and even buy back boats in Indonesia. Let's look at this and the rest of the week's politics. We're joined tonight by Liberal MP, Government MP, Alex Hawke, Rowan, a columnist with the Australian Financial Review. Tim Ayres is the New South Wales Secretary of the AMWU and also a member of Labor's National Executive, and Labor MP Ed Husic. Welcome to you all. Let's start with border protection. As I say, this is going to be a challenge for the Prime Minister, given what we know about Indonesia's concerns over the policy. Alex Hawke, first to you. How would you characterise the concerns from what you've heard that Indonesia has about your policy?
Well, look, I think, David, to begin with, we're doing everything we said we would do, and that is be very purposeful and methodical about it. And I think when you see Tony Abbott going to Jakarta as his first overseas visit, he's doing exactly what he said he would do before the election, and that is treat that relationship with a great significance. And it's about relationship building. It's not something, border protection in particular, that you can debate in the media, something that's got to be done with the strength and depth of relationship that we saw in the Howard government. And he's going over there on Monday to restart that relationship as a new Prime Minister with a very important, our most important nearest neighbour.
Yeah, absolutely. But when it comes to Indonesia, do you take seriously the concerns that they have? Do you think they are serious about the issues that they've raised?
I think certain people in Indonesia are making comments, and they're making comments about things they've seen in the media. The reality of this is it won't be resolved in the media.
But it's not just the media here, because the Indonesian Foreign Minister has just met with Australia's Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, in New York. And he said after that meeting that, quote, "We have reiterated that Indonesia cannot accept any Australian policy that would, in nature, violate Indonesia's sovereignty. I think the message has been conveyed loud and clear and has been understood well." Why does he feel the need to say that after meeting Julie Bishop?
Well, I think every country feels the need to say that, no, they won't tolerate any policy that violates their sovereignty. And can I just say, David, we wouldn't tolerate any policy that violates Indonesia's sovereignty. And the Prime Minister's made that very, very clear. And we're not going to countenance. I mean, we're not proposing any policy that would violate Indonesian sovereignty. I mean, that would be a very serious thing to do.
Rowan, does it strike you as unusual, though, that the Foreign Minister of Indonesia feels the need to say that after this meeting? If he has no worries, why would he say that?
Not really, David, because Indonesia, like all Southeast Asian countries, operates on they admire and respect strength, and everything is a bargain. So they're laying out their turf, saying, you know, if this is important to you, you will negotiate with us, and we're setting up our stall here, saying we're not just going to let you walk away with whatever you want. There's got to be a price, and you're going to have to pay it. So that would be how I would read it.
The Indonesians are looking for a negotiation.
Absolutely,
here,
right.
As
they do. And that's the way of doing business in Southeast Asia.
Can Tony Abbott negotiate on these things? I mean, these were central to his election campaign.
Certainly.
Turn back the boats.
Exactly.
Buy back boats.
So he's staked out his ground. He knows what he has to do.
So what can he negotiate? What can he give?
Aid, there's all sorts of things. And that is what the Indonesians will be talking to the Abbott government about. And the point is that under Labor, the whole sort of shenanigans with the, cancelling the beef trade and all this sort of stuff is exactly the wrong way to deal with Southeast Asian countries. You deal with a strong position and you hold your position.
You would be okay with a diplomatic trade-off here of aid for cooperation on this?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and that's what it will come down to. There will be things that the Indonesians want, and the Liberal, the government will have to decide whether they are prepared to, what they will negotiate in order to achieve the goals they want. But surely it's really clear they're going to get. Tony Abbott is determined to stop these boats, so he will negotiate his way, as will Julie Bishop. I have no doubt about that. Equally, the Indonesians, part of it is the fact that the Indonesians know that they have the Australians a little bit over a barrel. But more importantly, We are in the middle of an Indonesian election campaign as well. There's a very important election in Indonesia next year. So already we're hearing a diverse range of opinions from different people, all, as we saw in our own election campaign, staking out extreme positions.
President Yudhoyono isn't up for re-election. He doesn't have the political pressure on him. Just to be clear, though, you have no problem with using the aid budget as a trade-off for diplomatic goals.
I have no problem whatsoever with Australia negotiating honestly and in an upfront fashion with the Indonesians from a position of strength and honesty, which we did not see in the past.
Alex Hawke, just on that before we bring in the others, are you okay with using the aid budget to trade off here?
Well, look, the nature of negotiations between countries and diplomacy is that you don't discuss or canvass these things in public. So instinctively, there's no signs that will be the case. I mean, we're going over there to strengthen the relationship on a whole range of levels: trade, diplomatic efforts, also boats is important to Australia. But there's a whole range of matters that will be discussed, and the nature of those discussions will be behind closed doors. It's not about canvassing or airing those things in the public domain.
Ed Husic, in the end of the day, Indonesia, we know, has concerns about turning back boats, but it's not encroaching on their territory, this idea of turning them back once they're in Australian waters, and surely Australia's entitled to do what's in its best interests.
If we had a situation, if we reversed it, where the Indonesian Navy was escorting vessels into or in close proximity of Australian territorial waters, I could imagine what the reaction would be. And so they are expressing genuine concern about what is being put forward by the Abbott government. And they've been saying that loud and clear. It's been consistent from their side. As much as Tony Abbott has chosen to ignore it, they have been consistent on this point. And I suspect they're also concerned about the prospect of, if you do turn back these boats, what responsibility their government then has to assume for people as well. So they're weighing up a whole lot of things. I'm not going to have statements made that put diplomatic relationships, almost equate them to street market haggling that has sort of been expressed by yourself a few moments ago.
Sure.
And the suggestion that we didn't, strength is one thing in diplomacy, but there's also strength in being able to recognise the priorities of both sides and being able to reach an agreement. That's why we had the Bali process. That's why we've been trying to work on a regional basis to solve a regional problem. And my issue with what's being done is that, regardless of, as I said a few moments ago, the strength of the opposition, we're adamant at pushing something that would actually destabilise the strength of the relationship and, in effect, weaken the ability for us to get cooperation within the region on this issue.
But isn't there some scope to put a bit more pressure on Indonesia here? I mean, you used the example at the start there about what would we do if we were in the reverse position. I mean, if Australia had people flying in, getting on boats and heading to Indonesia, we'd be doing something more about it
that's
here,
a good point.
wouldn't we?
And we actually did. For instance, this whole issue of, particularly within Islamic countries, of being able to have the visa-free arrangements, the Indonesians had agreed with us to particularly in terms of the Iranian influx that was happening, that they would suspend that. And so we were doing that as a result of the type of cooperation that would be secured through the whole range of diplomatic initiatives that we had embarked upon. So your point is absolutely right, and we had some success on that. But it will take, and I think the proposal that then Prime Minister Rudd had secured with the Indonesian government of hosting that conference that would also involve other source countries as well was an important initiative that I do hope that this government continues. The final point I'd make very quickly is I've sat opposite Liberal members who, not Alex, but other MPs who, this week we've had as I'd previously said, we couldn't make boats the central focus of the relationship between Indonesia and Australia. Now we're having that vocalised, but before it was, that this was a crisis, that we'd lost control of borders, that the first priority, the very first week that Tony Abbott would visit Jakarta, after upbraiding Prime Minister Gillard, saying that she needed to be in Jakarta instead of Geneva.
Well, Tim, let me ask you on a political level, now that Labor's in opposition, do you think they should still make a big deal out of this issue of border protection and asylum seekers, or simply give the new government a go with its policies?
Well, the problem for the new government is that there's nothing more serious, nothing more that you have to be an adult about than foreign policy and dealing with your neighbours. And I think the government has just twigged how difficult and complex this issue really is. It's very easy to operate with three-word slogans and hooliganise in the community about asylum seekers and refugees, but suddenly on taking office, you realise that you're in very, very hot water and they haven't got a coherent policy response to this problem.
But the policy response
I think
this
there's
week...
two things that Labor has to do. One is Labor has to hold the government to account on these issues, must do.
But
we have to move as a country to having this issue taken out of politics and dealt with and treated with the respect that the complexity of this issue deserves.
But it's not being taken out of politics, is it? I mean, this week, for example, when Scott Morrison announced the new Operation Sovereign Borders, amongst other things, they're not going to announce publicly every boat. They're going to do that every week.
Yep.
And Labor leapt on that. And Ed Husic is shaking his head now.
Absolutely.
Why not give them a go at that for a little while and see if it works? Why make politics out of that this week?
Well, we're going to see how convoluted this is. We've moved from turn back the boats to buy the boats. Now Rowan's proposing, and I haven't heard Alex deny it, that we're not going to buy the boats anymore. We're going to try and buy the Indonesian government with aid. I mean, it's the most convoluted and preposterous
Okay, but just back on this question,
it's got to be dealt with seriously.
The information flow, going from announcing every boat to giving a weekly update, why not give that a try, just for a few months, and then criticise it? Why leap on that straight away, Ed?
Because I don't think, one, it's transparent, and two, if again, I come back to the notion that if we in government had suggested that, there would have been an outcry.
I don't doubt that.
About that whatsoever. And my issue is that there is no sense of transparency about what is believable in terms of those figures. How many boats did they try to turn back? We won't get any sense of that. And it is not being upfront with the Australian people about how they're actually managing this issue. This is effectively their way of their policy being tied to reality, the claim being actually matched up by fact, and instead of having a catch-us-if-you-can immigration minister, they should be fronting up and saying whether or not they met with success.
And look, David, we're not going to respond to the opposition on this sort of political stunt and tactic because...
Because you guys did it when you were in opposition.
No, because we were very clear in opposition about what we were going to do, and that is stop the boats. And if you do the same thing, the same behaviour over and over and over, you'll get the same results.
But it's a fair point, though, isn't it, that when you were in opposition, you'd make a pretty big deal about every boat that came.
Absolutely.
Every boat that came, there'd be a press release saying now it's up to whatever it was, 463. And
certainly, yeah. And
why was it a good idea to make a big deal of every boat then, but not now?
Well, because we were critical, not of the boats, we were critical of the government's failure on border
But in the
protection,
national interest of sending a deterrence message to asylum seekers and people smugglers, what aim did that serve?
Okay, well, so that was about the government's policy failure. They took out Howard's successful policy. They mucked around with it year after year after year.
Was more important than sending a deterrence.
The point was about the policy failure, and we needed consistent policy.
And you needed to score a political win.
As soon as we've come to government, no, we want to change the approach of government to border protection. And changing the approach, changing the approach means changing the information
flow. But didn't it then, when you were in opposition, didn't that then signal to people smugglers that it was okay to come through by doing that, by emphasising every boat?
The failure was government policy, and people smugglers are a sophisticated criminal outfit. Okay, they are all operate a sophistical crime case, and they move faster than this government did, the former government. And we're signalling to people smugglers and to the region that we're not going to be party to this sort of political game playing where they criticise us for
the
information
absurdity of
playing.
what was being the absurdity of your position.
Let's be clear on this, Ed. So you would release a press release every time a boat came. It served no meaningful purpose for anything.
But these guys trashed the national
even the journalists stopped listening to the press releases.
Election, trashed the national interest.
They stopped even looking at them.
The effect of...
They stopped looking at our
releases.
releases.
Say, the effect of what you guys did...
We have to do something different, and that's where we're at. The government has to do something different. We are doing something different.
David asked, will we give you a go? Right? That was your question earlier.
Yep.
Now, we weren't afforded that, giving a go.
Oh, you had
no,
come on,
because you joined up. You joined up, and here's the concrete example. When we tried to get the Malaysia, the amendments as the result of the High Court's ruling. We wanted to make changes so that it would give effect to Malaysia, and the opposition voted with the Greens to stop it. So you asked us about giving them a go, and you have to be mindful of the history. But hang on a second.
The approach is you guys were nasty in opposition, so we're going to be nasty too.
Well, no. Well, look, the opposition will make a. No, just hang on a second. There'll be broader views about it. Me as an individual, it's not about payback, but it's certainly about recognising that the way that they approach the issue. Don't you dare now say, "Oh no, we have to be above the politics of it." When they engaged in politics then. Now, the absurdity of this latest move of withdrawing the statistics, it seems to suggest that you'll confuse the people smugglers and that they won't know which boat arrived. They do not simply care. The only thing they need to know is they've had half the money paid up front, as has been talked about this week, and they just need to know when people reach Australia to release the second half. And they get that through all, as was, you had the people smuggler this week laugh at this suggestion that holding the stats back would work.
Do you think holding back this information for a weekly release is going to have any impact on people smugglers?
It's irrelevant. And the point is the Australian people have just voted out an incompetent government and put in what they hope will be a competent government. That is the only issue here. And the reason Tim hates slogans like "Stop the Boats" is because this government will be judged on its success or failure, as the previous government were,
measure, though, the question is...
Individual measures are irrelevant. In 3 years' time, either the boats will have stopped, in which case this government will be re-elected, and it'll be a long time before Albo or anyone else is.
Right now,
but the individual measures are completely unimportant. It is the intention to stop the boats, and this government has so far shown that they don't care what Labor or anyone else says. They will do it their way, which is their right to do it their way.
Now,
because
there has been a significant slowdown in boat arrivals. I think it's 1 or 2 a week now, and I think the one that arrived in Darwin yesterday or the day before had only 19 people on board. So there's no doubt in the statistics there's been a big... Who deserves credit for that?
Well, I wouldn't talk about the statistics. I would just say what Rowan's saying a different way, and that is I wouldn't underestimate this government's will in relation to stopping the boats, and that is a whole-of-government approach.
Do you give Labor any credit for the slowdown that we've seen?
No, I don't. I think they ran chaotic policy, and I think people smuggling is a sophisticated operation. They know that we have severe willpower, and Rowan is right on that point. We have strong will to stop the boats, and that is take all the measures necessary from government, a whole-of-government...
announcement of Papua New Guinea.
But you failed, Ed. You failed.
Okay.
And the Australian people gave you every chance to succeed.
That was your 15th incarnation of policy, and there was no clarity.
I would make is, and you said the individual measures don't count. Well, they actually do. The whole issue with the Howard government, what it got criticised in terms of this issue, was the culture of secrecy that allowed for Cornelia Rao and all these other things that were happening within detention facilities, and they needed to change and make a lot more transparent so the type of gross errors that were being made wouldn't be repeated. Individual measures, I in part agree with what you're saying in terms of, you'll be judged ultimately by the global objective, but I would not be as dismissive on this notion of individual measures because, as Tony Burke has rightly said, this was designed to stop the culture of secrecy by ramping up the transparency.
Just before we leave this whole issue, there's a lot more I want to talk about, but one line that rung out from Bill Shorten, in fact, during the leaders' debate that he had, or the candidates' debate with Anthony Albanese this week, he said that he was pro-refugees. Tim, we haven't heard leaders on either the Labor or Coalition side talk that way for a long time. Was that significant for you?
I think it was an important statement from Bill. I think that we absolutely have to be about a big Australia. We absolutely have to be about a migration program that builds our economy and builds a sophisticated, growing country. And a big refugee intake should be part of that. Now, we understand, of course, that the community's got an expectation that there be an orderly refugee migration program, and that's a legitimate expectation. But we've got these characters, particularly, I forget her name, the new MP from Penrith, who said that more refugees is bad for the M4. I mean, these guys have got a big problem because they've created all these expectations in the community. No wonder it's hide the boats. No wonder it's hide the boats, because they can't possibly meet those expectations. It can't survive in the digital age a strategy of hiding the boats, because people won't put up with it.
Okay.
Pro-refugees, though. Rowan, are you pro-refugees?
Of course I'm pro-refugees, and the most pro-refugee Prime Minister that this country has had was John Howard, who increased the immigration take way beyond anything we've had before. So this is just more nonsense from Bill Shorten, who's gone, oh, OK, I've got to have something that makes me look touchy-feely. But it goes to the problem that Labor have. They don't really want to stop the boats, but you're never honest enough to come out and say it. If Bill Shorten believes this, and if he goes to he should go to the electorate if he wins the leadership and say, I think we should let all the boats come in, because that's what I believe, and he will be voted or not voted for accordingly. But it's this lie that Labor lives, that they try and do one thing, but in their hearts they believe the other. And the Indonesians and the people smugglers are smart enough to spot the dishonesty in that line.
Well, I just think that's grossly wrong in terms of, I know what, having stood on the shoreline of Christmas Island as part of the inquiry that looked at those deaths in 2010, I know what in my heart and in my head as an individual parliamentarian needed to be done, and that was to stop people making that trip. And I spoke in Parliament passionately on this issue, and I've spoken on this program on it.
So what does pro-refugee mean?
The issue, and the way I took what he said, was this, that to not demonise people that were seeking refuge. That ultimately drives that. We can clearly discern between two things. One, where people have bought a place on a boat and got here that way, versus the people that I know, that I represent from my own electorate, who spent 10 years in camps waiting to be liberated and weren't. And so for me, as well, I felt very strongly that those people that didn't have liquid assets, that in some cases were forced to leave their home within half an hour, ended up in a camp, had no way out, couldn't find a way here, but the people that did have liquid assets could free up $10,000 and get a berth, could. And so for us, it's being able to discern, but not demonise people who seek refuge.
Absolutely. I think everybody agrees. Everybody's going to agree on that. And on that point, we're going to move on, because we'll take a quick break, then have a look at the Labor leadership contest that is underway. There's been a lot of attention on it, but is Labor really taking the opportunity after this election to think about where it should be going in the future? Stay with us.